programming is about building programs. So it's very important that you know what categories of programs you can build using a programming language. And there are two categories: interactive programs and non-interactive programs. And interactive programs can also be divided into three other subcategories: command line interface programs, desktop graphical user interface programs, and web interface programs. So in this video, I want to show you an example of all these types of programs. So let's begin. The first type of program is command line interface programs, which belongs to the user interactive program category. This here is an example of a command line interface program, and this is something that we'll build throughout the course, actually throughout the next days. So this black field here, black area, is known as the command line, and this allows the user to interact with the program by entering text and also looking at text on this command line interface. So for example, the user can type in show to see the to-do items and perhaps add a new to-do item, such as add fix the bike, show again, and that will be added there as a to-do item. So that was the first type of program. The second type is desktop graphical user interface programs. So this program can be installed on a computer, and the user here can interact using widgets such as text boxes and buttons. They can click on items and so on. And the third type of the interactive program category is web apps or web interface programs. Users can access them from their browser by using the URL pointing to that server, right? So this here is an example of a web app. So we'll also build this web app throughout the course. And yeah, the general idea here is that you can also add more items in this program as well. And you can check items to remove them from the to-do list. So these were the three types of interactive programs. And then you have the other category, non-interactive programs. A non-interactive program is a program that doesn't interact with the user. Let's take an example, a program which you run and it cleans your download folder, or it gets some Excel files from somewhere and it produces PDF files out of them. So all you do as a user is you just run that program, but you don't interact with the program. Thus the name non-interactive programs. Usually these programs run as background processes. The program will be scheduled to run every week to clean out the download folder and so on. We also build this type of program throughout the course. So these are the four types of programs you can build with programming languages. I wanted to make sure that you know this, and so now we're ready to start coding. Thanks, and let's move on with the next video. See you. Hey, welcome back. In this video, you will officially start day 1. And in this video, I just want to shortly let you know what you'll learn and what you'll build throughout this day and throughout the next days as well. So I assume you are an absolute beginner, and therefore I'll start with Python from scratch. We will build a to-do list app first, which has this command line interface, and then we will add a desktop graphical user interface to this program, and then after that we will add a web interface to this program. So you'll learn the complete spectrum of building a program using all the possible interfaces a program can have. So as I showed you already, this program lets the user see what to-do items users can have, and also lets users add new to-do items like that. They can see those items again and so on. So with this output in mind, we're ready to start coding. So let's write your first line of code in the next video. I'll see you there. Hey, welcome back. In this video, you will learn how to install a Python interpreter and an IDE. A Python interpreter is a software which is designed to interpret Python code. So Python itself is just a language, right? And you need a program to understand that language and produce output. And that program is known as the Python interpreter. And there's also the IDE. An IDE is like a text editor where you write that Python code. Now, an IDE is a bit more than a text editor because it has features which assist the coding process. The IDE we will use is Clipchamp, and I do highly recommend you that you also use Clipchamp. Even though it's possible to use another IDE of your choice, I do encourage you to use Clipchamp because it's the best IDE for Python. It's designed around Python. Right, so let's start by downloading and installing a Python interpreter. These instructions will cover Windows, Mac, and Linux operating systems. So no matter what operating system you're using, please go to python.org. So you can search for Python on Google and that should show up this page, python.org. Once the page loads, you should go to downloads, but then you might be tempted to download the current version, but please don't. As a rule of thumb, you should download a version which is 0.1 earlier than this version. That is because the current version usually will have many problems, and so the previous version will be more stable, especially when it comes to learning Python, or if you are using Python in production, you will run into problems that might frustrate you. So, if this is Python 3.11, in your case, you should download Python 3.10. If here you have Python 3.12, you should download Python 3.11 and so on. I'll show you how to download a previous version. So let's download a previous version. For that, you should go to this button, view the full list of downloads. And then scroll down here and further down until you see this section looking for a specific release. And so again, the first version will be the current version, so you want to find the version below that, which is in my case Python 3.10. The last number doesn't matter. So if the current version is 3.12, you should find down here 3.11 and so on. So I'll download 3.10.8. To do that, you should go to this button, press that button, and that will take you to another page which you should scroll down until this section here, files. Now here you have files for different operating systems. So if you are on Windows operating system 64-bit, please download Windows Installer 64-bit. If you're on Windows 32-bit, please download Windows Installer 32-bit. And if you're on Mac, you should download this file, Mac OS. And if you are on Linux, you should download the gzipped source tarball. So once you have downloaded a Python interpreter, let's go to a new browser tab and search for Clipchamp. And then go to the first page results, which should be from jetbrains.com. And then go to the download button. And here you have several tabs. You have a tab for Windows, Mac OS or Linux. So if you are on Windows, you should go to the Windows tab and then go to the community section. So Clipchamp has two versions, professional and community. Now, the community version is the best one for two reasons. First, it's free, and second, it's simpler than the professional version. And that could be a great advantage, especially if you are a beginner and you are learning, because the professional version might feel a bit of a black box. Many features in the professional version might seem like magic, and that means you will have troubles understanding parts of the coding process. So please download the community version using that button. For macOS, the same thing. You should download either an Intel or an Apple Silicon version depending on what Mac you're using, or you should press this button and that will find out what kind of processor your computer has. And for Linux, please download through that button in that tab. Right, so at this point, I assume that you have downloaded Python and Clipchamp, and now the instructions will be specific for different operating systems. So if you are on Windows, you can continue watching. If you are on Mac, you can jump in to minute 8:43. So you can skip this part and jump to that minute. If you are on Linux, you can jump to minute 11:31. So Windows users, let's start by installing the Python interpreter. For that, you should click that exe file. Then before pressing on that button, you should check this option, add python.exe to path. Then press on that install now button and just wait for the installation to finish. So the installation was successful, and we should try out if Python is actually working. To test that, you should go to the start menu on Windows and search for the command prompt. So open the command prompt app, and then in here type in py space minus 3.10 or 3.11, whatever version you installed. In my case it was 3.10. Press enter and that should open this view. So if you see these arrows, things are working fine. So if you do 2 plus 2, you'll get 4. So that's part of the Python language, and this language is being interpreted and the output is being produced by the Python interpreter we have just installed. So let's exit this command prompt and let's install Pycharm. So double click on the executable file you downloaded. This is asking if we want to allow this app to make changes. We press on yes, press on next. That's a destination folder where Pycharm will be installed. Press on next, and here preferably you want to check all the options and then press on next and install. At the end of the installation, this might ask you if you want to reboot your computer. That's not necessary, so you can just say I want to reboot later. So the rebooting will help to set some configurations, but we really don't need to have those configurations right now. And so let's check if Pycharm was actually installed correctly by searching for Pycharm on the start menu, and you should see the Pycharm community edition there. So press on that. Press on do not import settings unless you had some previous settings that you used before, if you had Pycharm before. So you should see this window, and that means Pycharm has been installed correctly. Now that's about installing the Python interpreter and Pycharm on Windows. And here is how to install Python and Pycharm on Mac OS. So let's start by double clicking the pkg file. Press on continue, 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 press on agree and install. Provide your passwords for your Mac OS account. And this window should show up. So this is the directory where Python was installed. A good idea is to double click this install certificates.command file. So you can find this in applications, Python 3.10 or 3.11, whatever version you installed, and then you have this file. So double click that. This terminal should show up. So this certificate is useful when you want to send out emails with Python. So close that window and let's check if Python was actually installed correctly. So for that you want to open the terminal on your Mac and type in Python 3.10 or 0.11, whatever version you installed. So it was 3.10 in my case, no spaces. Press enter, and if you see these 3 arrows, that means Python was installed correctly. So this is the interpreter now, and we can write in code in here. For example, 2 plus 2, we get 4. Right, so this is one way to code, but it's not the best way. The best way is to write the code in an IDE such as Pycharm. So let's go and install Pycharm from the downloads folder. So there we go, Pycharm community, double click that and you want to drag that icon to the applications folder. And that should have installed PyCharm. So you can search on the Launchpad for PyCharm, and it should be here, PyCharm CE. CE stands for Community Edition. So if you click on that and press on Open, you should see a window which looks something like this. Now, I did have projects before, so these PyCharm projects are being listed in here. In your case, this is probably empty, but later on, as you create projects, you will have those projects listed in here. So if you've got this kind of window, that means PyCharm was installed correctly. So that was about installing Python and PyCharm on Mac. And here is how to install Python and PyCharm on Linux computers. Now I'll show you the way to install Python and PyCharm through the terminal. And there's also another way to install Python and PyCharm, and that is by installing the files you download from python.org and jetbrains.com. But in this video we will cover the first way, and that is through the terminal. So let's install Python first. You should first do add-apt-repository. So add -apt -repository space ppa : dead snakes /ppa. And if you get this error, you should do that command again and use sudo in front. So enter the password for your Linux account. This is asking you to press enter if you want to continue, so press enter. Then you want to do sudo apt get update to update the repository. Press on enter for that command as well. And finally you want to do apt install Python 3.10 in my case. So if the current version of Python is 3.11, perhaps it's a good idea to use Python 3.10. If the current version is 3.12, use 3.11 here, and so on. So 3.10 in my case. And if you've got that error, that means you should use sudo apt install Python 3.10. Press on Y and then enter. And that should have installed Python in your Linux. To make sure Python was actually installed, you can write Python 3.10 in my case, maybe 3.11 in your case. Press enter, and if you see these three arrows here, that means Python was installed. And you can write in Python code and press enter to execute it. So you can type in Python code here, but a better way to run Python code is through PyCharm. So let's install PyCharm. For that, you need to open a new terminal window. So you can press on that icon perhaps to open a fresh terminal. And here you want to do sudo snap. So we will use the snap package manager to install PyCharm -community space -- classic and press enter. Enter the password of your Linux account, and that command should download PyCharm and it will also install it. So it was installed in my computer, so you can just check if PyCharm was actually installed. You can search for PyCharm among your programs, press on enter to open it, and PyCharm should open up. So that was how to install PyCharm on Linux. And that concludes this video. If you have issues with the installation process, please post a question in the Q&A. We'll be happy to help you there. So with that, I'll see you in the next videos. In this video, you will start building the to-do app. So here you will write the first line of code for this app. And the big question is, where do you start? And the answer for that is start simple. So create a very basic version of your app first, and then you can add features along the road. So for our particular app, where we want to start is we want to show a message to the user to ask them to enter a to-do. So the first version of our program, which we will build in this video, is just show a message to the user telling them to enter a to-do. So let's do that. Now, this is my PyCharm IDE. If you have just installed PyCharm and you haven't created anything yet, you'll probably see this window and you should go to new project. If you have already opened PyCharm, then you should have a file menu here somewhere, and you can go to file and then new project. And that should do the same thing as this button here does. So by creating a new project, what you actually do is you create an empty folder, an empty directory, and in that directory you will put all your Python program files. So for this you need an empty directory. Now PyCharm suggests me a directory path here, but I want to specify my own directory path. So I'll go to Browse and then I'll pick an empty folder. So previously I created this app1 empty folder on my computer. So that's an empty folder, so I'll click on Open. And that defines the directory path of your project. Here we will write our Python programs in this directory. Now the next option is the environment. Now please leave this as it is, virtual env. I'll explain later what that is, but not today. And then you see this base interpreter. Here you want to be very careful. So these are all the Python installations that I have. So if you installed Python 3.10, you should select Python 3.10 as the interpreter. So what we installed earlier was a Python interpreter. It is a program which interprets the language, the Python code that we write. So this interpreter is the software that will execute our Python code. And there are different versions. So the version you downloaded, you should select it here. So I'll select 3.10 and then just press on Create. And that will create a PyCharm project. You can press on Close on that. And in this directory now, we have one folder named venv and this file main.py. Please don't delete the venv folder. That is a virtual environment which I'll explain later on in the course. And main.py is a file that PyCharm automatically creates, and this is a Python file. You don't need this, so PyCharm is just being nice and creating a file for us, but you can delete that and create a new file. So to create new Python files, you right click, go to New and go to Python file. Press that, give a name to your file. So main is a good name that many programmers use. So you can either specify .py, but even if you don't specify that, PyCharm will add a .py extension. So whatever you prefer, either way you will have a main.py file. In this file now we write the Python code. So as we said, what do we want to do? Well, let's start by thinking about the output and about the user. So we want to tell the user to enter a to-do. So to show output on the command line, you use the print function with parentheses, and inside parentheses you put the text you want to show. And the text in Python goes always inside quotes. So double quotes and say enter a to-do. So that's the text we want to show. To run this program now, there are two ways to do it. you either right-click somewhere in this area in the text editor and go to Run Main, or you press that button. But I suggest to right-click here and go to Run Main, because if you use this button here, when you have multiple Python files, it could be that the selection here could be another file, not the file that you have opened in here. And in that case, you might think that you'll be executing the file that's open in here, but in fact this button always executes whatever file is selected in here, not the file that is opened in here. So to make sure that you are executing the file which is opened in here, just right click here and go to Run Main, or use the shortcut that you see on the right on your Clipchamp program. So for my case it is this shortcut. So press that to run the program and you'll see this area here. So that's the Run tab which shows this output, and that's enter to do. That's the text that we instructed Python to print out on the command line. So that's the command line. And that's our Python program which produces that output. Now, if you're using Clipchamp, you don't need to save the files. So you don't need to go to File, Save, because the files are automatically saved on Clipchamp. So if we close this Clipchamp window now, you can go again to File and Open, and then locate that folder again and click on Open to open it. Or you can also go to File, Open Recent, and you'll see that project in here. So that's a project that will open again this window, and you can keep on coding. So that's about creating and running a Python program. In the next video we will add a feature to our program to make it more interactive. So I'll talk to you there. Previously, we wrote a program which shows this query to the user, this text. The problem here is that the user cannot interact with our program, so this area here is not typable. The user cannot enter any text, and therefore you cannot process user input just yet. But in this video you will learn how to get user input, process it, and return processed output to the user. So that will open you to a wide range of possibilities what you can do with Python. So let's start. To get user input, you use the input function. You see this syntax is similar to this syntax here, but I'll explain more about the syntax in this video in about 3 minutes. So let's focus on the user for now, on the program output. If I execute this program now, at first glance it looks the same, but first of all we don't see that text here which says that the program execution finished or something like that. So the program is in an on-demand mode now. It is waiting for the user to enter some input. So as a user you can click here and enter some input, for example a to do. So you get the string enter to do, you enter the to do, and you press enter to submit that text to the program. And there we have this process finished with the exit code 0. But what happened to this user text? Well, nothing happened because we didn't process that. So we just asked the user to enter some input and that's all. So if you want to process something, first you want to save that something in a variable. So that's why we want to save whatever text user enters, we want to save it in a variable, such as user underscore text is equal to that. So now this variable is just like a box where you put in different values, different content. In this case, this box will contain the user text clean the bag. And then we can print out that box, user underscore text. So let's execute this now and see the behavior. Enter to do, throw the trash, enter, and we get throw the trash printed out. So here is what happened. The program starts to execute the script line by line, starting from top and going down to the bottom. So it prints out, enter a to do, this is the output of that, and then it waits for input. In the second line, the user enters some input. The input is stored in user text variable, and then you print out that input in the last line. Right, so let's talk about syntax now. What are all these parentheses and quotes? Well, print and input are functions. You see the similarity in syntax. So print has this open parenthesis and this other closing parenthesis. But you can also have print without anything inside, just like we have input. So if I run the code now, you'll see nothing here because print didn't print out anything. However, input is asking for input, so here we can enter some input. Clean the bag, press enter, and user text, actually clean the bag, will be printed out, the content of the user text variable. This part here is known as the argument of the print function in this case. So functions can have 0 or more arguments. The input function, by the way, can also get an argument. So if you delete that text from there and you put it in the input function, enter a to do, and you can also remove print because we don't need it now. So just execute the code as it is, and we get enter a to do. So what happens is that the input function is designed to print out its argument on the command line, but also is able to get the input from the user and return that user input. So functions can return a value, and in this case, this function will return the user string. So clean the bag. That's the user string or text. Why am I saying string? Well, because text in Python is known as string. So it's a string type. You see, we have functions and we have strings and we have variables. So everything has its own syntax. And whenever something has quotes, it is a string. So it's text that you write, and you can write wherever you want. But these pieces of texts which don't have quotes are keywords. So you have to write them as you see them. However, the exception here is the variable. It doesn't have quotes, but still you can write wherever you like. So you can add a number after user, user1 text, and also here, and you're going to get the same output. You can also have underscore as I did here, or you can just have a simple variable like that, text. You cannot have numbers in the beginning of the variable though, that is not allowed. So you'll get an error if you do that. And before I close this lecture, I wanted you to know that it is also possible to store this string in a variable. Let's create a variable called message or prompt, however you like to call that variable, and this would be equal to this string. So cut that out, paste it in here, and then here you write the prompt. variable. And things will work exactly the same. So the program is running now. I can stop it and rerun it. Enter the to-do, meet Tom, and we get the same behavior. So meet Tom is printed out. Now you could ask, should we do the previous version or this version? Well, this is mostly a matter of preference. Both methods have their own pros and cons. For example, having this variable here adds some code to your program. So now you have 3 lines as opposed to having 2 lines of code. However, having variables like this tends to improve the structure of the program, especially when you name your variables with meaningful names. So prompt, or you could do better and say user prompt and then rename that here, of course, user prompt. So now you know what this is. So it's some text that you are showing to the user. So as a programmer, when you read this code later on, you will understand what's going on. And also other programmers can also understand your code. So you should also be a good citizen and write code which is readable. So this tends to improve readability in your code. You see now input user prompt, and you know that you're showing a message, a prompt to the user. And there's also another advantage which you'll understand later on when you learn how to debug your programs. Having intermediate variables like this. So by intermediate variables, I mean variables which you don't need to write, but you can write as we did here. So having intermediate variables makes it easier to debug your code for errors, because you are doing things step by step. So when you use a debugger, the debugger will like to have more lines of code, so it goes step by step and troubleshoots the issues. So that's the state of our program. Right now it gets input and it returns the same input that it got. Now what's next? Well, I'll tell you that in the next video, so I'll see you there. Currently our program asks the user for input, so the user enters a to-do and the program prints out the to-do. But that's not what we want. What we want is to let the user enter multiple to-dos in the command line. So how can we do that? Well, one way to do that is, of course, to have multiple input functions. So let's try to do that. Let's say text1, or better, let's name this to do one, right, is equal to that. And then to do 2 is equal to input again, user prompt, and let's ask for another to do 3 is equal to input user prompt. And then what do we print out in here? Well, first let me remove this and execute the program as it is and see what will happen. So we get this message, enter a to-do, we enter clean the bag, meet Tom, throw the trash. So we were asked 3 times to enter to-dos, and each of these strings were stored in its corresponding variable. So now what do we do with these values? Well, we need a type in Python which allows us to store multiple items. So far you saw this type, a string, which is designed for text. And then we have another data type whose syntax is this one in here. So strings start with double quotes and they end with double quotes. And this thing here, which is called a list, a Python list, starts with opening square brackets and it ends with closing square brackets. And inside here you can enter the items. So to do 1, to do 2, to do 3. And then print out to-dos. Run, mid sen, throw trash, clean the bag. And then we get printed out the lists that we assigned in this variable. So to-dos is another variable. We have one variable here, 2, 3, 4, 5 variables in our code. Each variable is associated with its own value. A string here. This variable is associated with the output of the input function, which is again a string. And this variable is associated with a list. Now let me explain what I'm talking about when I say types. So I'm going to print out here, down here, the type of user prompt and execute the script. So enter a to-do, let's keep it short, clean, mid, throw, and this is the list. So this is printed out by this print function, and then we have another output here, class str. So that output is the result of this line. So the type of this value is str, it's a string. If you check the type of to-dos, so here you point the variable and you get the type of the value that the variable is associated with. So to-dos points to a list, therefore we're going to get a list this time. Throw clean mid, and you see it's a list this time. So to-dos is a list. And lastly, let's check to-do 1. To-do 1, what is it? So to-do 1 would be this text here that I enter. Throw. This would be to-do 2, clean, and meet. So str for to-do 1. So both this and the output of the input function are strings. So when the user enters some text here, that text is converted into a string type by the input function. So the input function gets that text, those characters from the command line, and it produces a string in Python. So we don't see that string in the Python script here, because you are not explicitly writing that strings as we do here. That string is implicitly created, and we only see that when we print it out somewhere in the command line. And so type here is a function. You see the syntax type, and it has these round parentheses, and inside we put an argument. So the argument can be anything. So in this case, it's the variable holding that string. The type function is designed to output. So every function outputs something. So this type function is designed to output the type of its argument, which was a string in this case. So to wrap it up in this video, what we did is we created multiple input functions and we stored each of the outputs in a Python list. So a list is needed to store multiple objects. So if you want, you can also add a literal string here and not only variables. So this is a string coming from that variable, but you can also say just hello here and you run it. Clean, throw, meet, and you see hello is also part of that list. Now, of course, the question is this sustainable? So having to write multiple functions for every to-do, Well, the answer is of course not. This is not sustainable. We don't know how many to-dos the user wants to enter. So we need to automate this process. We need to let the user decide how many to-dos they want to enter. And we don't want to write here 200 input functions. So of course there's a way to avoid that, and I'll talk to you about that in the next video. So thanks a lot and keep on learning. See you. Hi, welcome to the first video on code experiments. These kinds of videos aim to make you understand how the Python programming language works by trying to experiment with the code you have written so far. So in other words, I'll ask you to change certain elements in your code and observe how the output changes. This way you are able to see the code from different perspectives and not only from one single perspective, as covered in the previous videos of today. So let's start and you'll see how this code experiments videos work. So first experiment. So I need you to follow me. Please remove the second quote in the user prompt variable declaration and run the code. So I'd like you to do the same thing that I'm suggesting. So if you run the code, you will get this output. This is an error that the Python interpreter is generating. So the Python interpreter, which is the software that we installed, is trying to make sense of this script, but it cannot. Therefore, it produces an error. Now, let's read the error. First line is this one in here. That's just the Python interpreter executing our script. So that's the path to the Python interpreter in my computer, and that's the path to main.py file where the script is located. So PyCharm automatically executes this command in your computer, so that's nothing to worry about. But then we have this file, main.py. So this is the file where the error has occurred, and we get this line 1, that's the line where the error occurred. So if you want to click there, it will take you directly to that line, line 1. You also get the line which has the error in here, and it gives you some clue where the error is, more or less, but you have to use your own logic. What happened to the code? What's the problem with the code? So Python cannot fix the issue for you. The interpreter cannot fix the issue. You as a programmer have to understand what the issue is and then change the code. And lastly, we have the type of the error. There are different types of errors which we will encounter as we move on through the course, but this one is a syntax error. So the interpreter says unterminated string literal. So this gives you some clue. The Python interpreter found out that you were about to declare a string since you started to type in quotes, but then the interpreter went up to here and it found out that the string was not terminated. So you need a quote to terminate that. Right, experiment number 2. Change the double quotes to single quotes. So single quote there, single quote in there too. Run the code. To do, clean, and so on. So the code is working fine. So what's the point of this experiment? Well, the point here is that single quotes work as good as double quotes. So some people tend to use double quotes, some other people tend to use single quotes, but if you had here words such as don't, which has this single quote inside, then you have to use double quotes around the string because things will get mixed up. So the interpreter, the Python interpreter, will get confused since you had a single quote here, but then you close the quote in there and Python thinks that, oh, that's the string, and then this other part is confusing. So normally there's a rule of thumb that for long strings you should use double quotes like this. If it's just a short string such as hello, then it's fine to use single quotes. Next experiment. Try to remove one of these parentheses and run the code, and you'll see that you'll get an error. So again, it's a syntax error. It says this parenthesis was never closed. So now you know that you missed the parenthesis here, and then you write it again. You also see that we have these red underlines here. This is from Clipchamp. The IDE also does some checking of the script before you execute the script. So you know now that even if you execute the script, you'll get some errors. So if you go in here and you hover your cursor in this underline, Clipchamp will say that this closing parenthesis is expected, so that you don't have to run the code. You know that from Clipchamp. Next experiment. Try to remove the space between this assignment operator and run the code, and you'll see that the code will work just fine. So I'll close this. So my point with this experiment is to show you that white space doesn't matter in Python. So whether it is with spaces around the assignment operator or not, it doesn't matter for the Python interpreter. However, it is recommended to have space around the assignment operator because it makes the code more readable. So for you as a programmer, it's better to have that space around that. And also Clipchamp will suggest me to actually reformat the file. So if I press here, it will automatically add spaces around the assignment operator. And the last experiment I would like you to do is to just put this line here on top and make a space and run the program. You will get an error. So my point with this experiment is to show you that expressions have to be written one in each line. So if you have a variable declaration here, you write it in one line, and that's it. And then another declaration here, you write it in another line. Maybe you do some processing, some formulas, you write the formula in one line. So with that, I'll finish this video, and thank you for following. I'll see you later. Hi, welcome to the first video on bonus examples. In bonus example videos, we will write simple, small Python programs. The purpose here is to revise the items you learned throughout the previous videos while building our app, our main app. So this is a way to use the Python elements from a different perspectives so that you understand the concepts better. For this first video for today, we will be building a program which checks the title of a book and gives us the length of that title. So let's imagine that you want to write a book. You have contacted a publisher and they tell you that your title shouldn't be more than 100 characters. So you want a tool that tells you the number of characters for your title. So you are testing out different titles and you want to see quickly. So the program will work like this. There's a prompt here, enter title, and you should enter a title here, such as comparing the different cherry drying methods. Press enter and you get this title length is 46. That's the output of the program. So So I'm not showing you the code, but we will build it now step by step. So let's create a new Python file, bonus1.py. So again, think about the user. We want to show a message to the user, so let's create a variable which is equal to input, enter a title, maybe a colon, maybe a space here, so that's the text. You can also use double quotes, both will work. So wherever the user enters in the command line, that string will be stored in text in the text variable. And then, how do we check the length of a string? The length is the number of characters of a string. So how many characters does this text have? You can check the number of characters for a string using the len function. So let's say length is a variable that is equal to the len function. The len function gets as input, as argument, the string which it should check for the length. So that will store the number of characters in the length. Print length, and this should work. So enter a title, cherry drawing, press enter, you get 13. If you want to add some extra information here to make the output more user-friendly, what you can do is add another argument to print. So another object, the length of the title, maybe a colon, and run again, right click and go to run bonus1, enter a title, cherry drawing. The length of the title is 13, so 13 characters in cherry drawing. So that's about this example. So I introduced you to a new function, the len function. So len, input, print are all functions. Each of them gets some input, like here. The print function can get multiple inputs, and so each of them produces some output. So the output of the len function was a number. We will cover numbers later on, and that number was stored in this variable. So with that, thank you for following this, and I'll see you later. In this video you will learn how to use the Python console. That is a tool which will make your programming easier. So what is the Python console? Where can you access it? If you are on Clipchamp, it's very easy to access the console. You can just go to this tab, press it, and this will open the Python console. You know the console is working when you see these three arrows. If you don't have this Python console, because you're in another IDE, there's another way to open the Python console. Your IDE probably has a terminal tool. So you can open the terminal, and then here you can write one of these commands. Either Python, you can also try pi-3, press enter to see if it works, or Python 3.10 or Python 3.11. So one of these will work. In my case, Python works well, so I see these three arrows in here. But on Clipchamp, I can just use the embedded Python console in here, which is the same thing as the one you get from the terminal. So what is the Python console? Well, in the console here, you can write Python code just like you do in a .py file. So for example, you can declare variables, you can do whatever you want. Prompt is equal to enter a to-do, press enter, and then you can continue coding and you get the output immediately. So enter a to-do is the string that we stored in user prompt, and we got that printed out. But if you close the console, and then you open it again, and then you try to print out user prompt, you'll get an error because you lost the code that you wrote previously. So the Python console is only used for throwaway code. So quick code you want to just test out to see how things work. For example, let's say we were programming here. We defined a variable and then we are not sure if we want to use an input function or something else. So we quickly go to the console and try the input function here to see if that's the right thing we want to use. So you can just press enter and you get this prompt. Hey, it asks you to enter some input. So now we know that this is probably the function we're looking for. Or maybe you just want to check the type of this text, enter to do, you press enter and you get the type. So you know that it is a string. So you don't have to write that code in your program file. So as you can see, the Python console has pros and cons. The pro is that you can quickly get output, and the con is that the code is lost once you close the Python console tab. Now, it's important to understand how exactly the console is working. So what happens when you run a normal .py file is that Python executes this line and then it executes that line, that one, and so on. So it executes all the lines in a split of a second. Now with the console, the things are different. You execute lines one by one. So you write that line first, press enter, Python executes that. You can also see here on the left that a variable has been registered in the session here. So the execution now is halting, is an on-demand interpreter. Basically, the interpreter is waiting for lines from the programmer to be executed. So in this session now, you have access to that variable and maybe other variables that you define and execute in here. So other is also a variable. You can also see the type here, str. So hello is a string, enter a to do is also a string. My list would be a list. You can see here list, and it has this 0, which means there are 0 items. If you want to call a previously executed item, you go here, put the cursor in here and then press the upper arrow key on your keyboard, and that will call the previously executed expression. If you press the upper key again, it calls the expression before that, and so on. You go back again with down arrow key, up, down, until you find what you want. So my list could have more items such as hello, hi. So 2 strings. You see these are split with a comma. Press, and now my list has been updated. You see these are 2 items now. So that's about the Python console. It's a great way to help you with programming and also excellent for learning. So you can experiment very quickly using the Python console. And of course, when you want to write a program, you want to store the code in a Python file because the file is stored on disk, so you don't lose the changes. With that, I thank you and I'll talk to you later.